There was a time when the hidden city of Gondolin stood as a beacon of defiance against the shadow that loomed over Beleriand. In the year 116 of the First Age, when Turgon, son of Fingolfin, beheld a vision from Ulmo, Lord of Waters, he sought to establish a sanctuary, a stronghold against the might of Morgoth. With secrecy beyond any known to elves or men, Gondolin was raised in the valley of Tumladen, encircled by the unyielding Ekraiath, the encircling mountains, veiling it from all but those whom the king deemed worthy of its knowledge. For centuries, the city flourished, unseen and unassailable, a marvel of elven craft and wisdom. But, as with all things in Arda, doom was woven into its fate. Gondolin was more than a refuge. It was a dream of what could be, a realm untouched by the wars that raged beyond its walls. It was a city of white towers and silver fountains, where the Noldor dwelt in peace, singing beneath the light of the stars and the flames of their own wrought lamps. Yet, beneath this peace lurked the echoes of the doom of Mandos, the curse laid upon the Noldor for their rebellion against the Valar. Though Turgon had turned away from war and sought no quarrel with Morgoth, the Dark Lord's will was ceaseless. He feared what he could not see, and that which was hidden from him he sought to uncover. The tragedy of Gondolin was not merely its fall, but the betrayal that made it so. For all the power of its walls and the valor of its people, it was undone by treachery. Maeglin, son of Eorl and Aradel, bore within him a darkness that festered in the shadows of his heart. His desire for Idril, Turgon's daughter, grew into an obsession, and his jealousy of Tuor, the man she loved, twisted him into a pawn of Morgoth. Captured in the wilds, Maeglin surrendered all, the hidden ways to Gondolin, the secret paths through the mountains, the very heart of its defenses. And Morgoth, with cruel patience, waited until the time was right. In the year 510 of the First Age, as the festival of Tarnin Oster was celebrated and songs rose to the heavens, the storm of ruin gathered beyond the Ekoriath. Balrogs, dragons, and legions of orcs, led by Morgoth's captains, marched upon the city. The sky darkened with fire, and cries of despair shattered the peace of Gondolin. Turgon, standing upon his tower, beheld the doom of his people, and his heart was weighed with grief. Yet even in that hour, he would not flee. He bade his people to go, but he himself would remain, for he would not abandon the city that had been his labor of love for centuries. The battle that followed was one of the most harrowing in the history of the First Age. Ectilion of the Fountain met Gothmog, lord of Balrogs, in single combat, and in slaying the demon, he too perished. Glorfindel, golden-hide and valiant, fought to protect the fleeing survivors, and on the heights of Cirith Thornath, he cast a Balrog into the abyss, though he was dragged down with it. Tuor, with Idril and their son Eorendil, led the remnant through hidden ways, guided by the wisdom of Ulmo's whispers. Yet the white walls of Gondolin, once gleaming with beauty, were blackened by flame, and its towers, which had risen like the crowns of the Eldar, crumbled into ruin. As the fires consumed the city, the cries of the dying echoed through the streets of Gondolin. No refuge remained, no sanctuary unmarred. The fountains that had once danced with silver light now ran red with the blood of elves. The great square before the Tower of the King, where once the people had gathered in joy, became a battleground of despair. Balrogs and orcs trampled the beauty of ages beneath their feet, and the sky was choked with smoke and sorcery. Morgoth's triumph was complete, or so he believed. For in that hour of ruin, hope was carried upon the shoulders of the exiles. Tuor, the man whose coming had long been foretold by Ulmo, had prepared a secret way out of the city, a path known only to Idril and a trusted few. Through the house of the king, through the chambers now abandoned by the dead, they fled. Maeglin, the traitor, had sought to claim Idril and the child Eorendil for himself. But Tuor cast him from the walls, his broken body lost among the ruin. And thus the line of Gondolin's royal house was preserved, though its throne would never rise again. The flight from Gondolin was no swift deliverance. Pursued through the mountains, the refugees faced terror at Cirith Oronath, the Eagle's Cleft. It was there, upon the narrow and wind-torn pass, that Morgoth's hunters fell upon them once more. Orcs came forth like a tide, and behind them loomed a Balrog, its fiery whip lashing the stone. It was Glorfindel who stood against the demon, his sword meeting the black blade of his foe. Their duel was a song of light and shadow, and though the Golden Warrior struck down the creature, he too was dragged into the abyss. But the Eagles of Manwë, led by Thorondor, came in wrath, scattering the enemy and lifting the weary survivors upon their wings. At last the remnant came to Nantathren, the land of willows, where the waters of Sirion flowed with sorrow. There Tuor and Idril wept for their fallen kin, and the last of Gondolin's exiles mourned what was lost. Turgon was gone, buried beneath the ruin of his city, and with him passed the last great kingdom of the Noldor in Middle-earth. The hidden city, which had endured for nearly 4 centuries, was no more. Yet, in the silence that followed, a new hope was kindled, for among them was Eorendil, a child of both elves and men, whose destiny would shape the fate of all who remained. Morgoth, in his pride, believed Gondolin's fall to be his final victory over the Eldar. But the deeds of that night were not the end of the story. From the ashes of one tragedy would rise the salvation of Middle-earth. The line of Turgon, though broken in stone, remained unbroken in blood. And far away upon the western seas, the echoes of Gondolin's fall would one day reach the shores of Aman, where the Valar still watched and waited. For many days, the survivors of Gondolin wandered south, their hearts heavy with grief. Every step away from Tumladen was a step into a world that no longer held a home for them. They had seen their kin slaughtered, their halls defiled, their banners trampled into the dust. The Noldor had built Gondolin as a last refuge, a dream of Valinor preserved in Middle-earth, but now it was a memory, one that would haunt the remnant until the end of their days. Yet even in sorrow they pressed on, for there was no other choice. The will of Ulmo had not forsaken them, and Tuor, ever the bearer of destiny, led them to the mouths of Sirion. There, at the meeting of river and sea, they found others who had fled from Morgoth's wrath. Refugees of Doriath, survivors of the ruin of Nargothrond, and those who had drifted to the southern shores in search of sanctuary. Among them was Elwing, granddaughter of Thingol, who carried the Silmaril wrested from the ruins of Menegroth. It was a gathering of the dispossessed, those whom fate had cast together in the twilight of the First Age. The once proud houses of the Eldar were now reduced to exiles, and the glory of Beleriand was fading like the last light of the sinking sun. But amid that sorrow, a great purpose was being shaped. Eärendil, son of Tuor and Idil, was raised among the waves and the winds, his heart ever turning toward the vastness of the sea. Though born of Gondolin's ruin, he knew little of its splendor. Only the sadness in his mother's eyes when she spoke of white towers that no longer stood. Yet through him the legacy of both Gondolin and Doriath endured. A blending of two noble lines that would one day seek the mercy of the Valar. Even as Morgoth sat upon his throne in Angband, believing himself the master of all Middle-earth, the tide of fate was shifting. The destruction of Gondolin was not the end, but the beginning of a greater doom, one that even the Dark Lord had not foreseen. Yet, before that doom could unfold, there would be another betrayal, another sorrow upon sorrow. The sons of Feanor, ever bound by the oath that had cursed them, turned their eyes upon the Silmaril of Elwing. Driven by desperation and the consuming madness of their vow, they came to the havens of Sirion with fire and steel. The elves who had once fled the wrath of Morgoth now faced ruin at the hands of their own kin. It was a slaughter bitter beyond reckoning, and though Elwing cast herself into the sea to escape the grasp of Maedhros, the cost was terrible. The last refuge of the Eldar in Middle-earth was sundered, and the doom of the Noldor was fulfilled in blood. But from the depths, Ulmo's hand still guided the fate of Arda. Elwing did not perish, nor did the hope of the Eldar fade entirely. Bearing the Silmaril, she was lifted by the waves, and in time she was reunited with Eärendil. Together they would seek that which none had dared before, the passage to Aman, to stand before the Valar and plead for the salvation of Middle-earth. And so from the ruin of Gondolin, from the ashes of betrayal and despair, the path was set for the greatest turning of the age. Eärendil, though raised among the exiles, carried within him the fire of Gondolin's fallen lords and the wisdom of Ulmo's calling. As he grew, the sea became his longing, and the hunger to find what lay beyond the horizon took root in his heart. Yet it was not mere wanderlust that drove him. It was destiny, woven in the music of the Ainur before time itself. With his ship, Vingilat, he sailed the waters of Beligere, seeking a path that no mortal had taken. The remnants of the Eldar watched as he departed upon the tides, a son of both elves and men, bearing the last hope of Middle-earth upon his brow. Through countless perils, through storm and shadow, he pressed on. Morgoth's darkness lay thick upon the world, and the seas were wild with the malice of the enemy. But Eärendil was no ordinary mariner. The light of the Silmaril, bound to Elwing and given by fate into his keeping, shone through the gloom, a defiance against the long years of despair. And at last, beyond all reckoning, beyond the lands where even the most ancient mariners had turned back, he found the straight road. The shores of Aman rose before him, silver in the light of the two trees' memory, and the doom of Gondolin at last found its purpose. No mortal foot had stood upon those shores since the exile of the Noldor. The doom of Mandos had barred Valinor from the children of Middle-earth, and none had dared to approach the Undying Lands. Yet Eärendil, guided by love and fate, passed beyond the Valori. He came before the Valar, standing alone in the courts of the powers, and he spoke for all who remained in darkness. He spoke of the ruin of Beleriand, of the long suffering of the Eldar and the Edain, of the fall of Doriath and Nargothrond, of the burning of Gondolin, and of the chains that bound the world beneath Morgoth's tyranny. And as he pleaded, the Silmaril blazed upon his brow, its light unclouded by oath or greed. The Valar listened, and at last their hearts were moved. For long had they waited, bound by the decree of the doom, but now the time had come to break their silence. The cry of Middle-earth had reached even the halls of Ilmarin, and the plea of Gondolin's last heir would not go unanswered. The host of the West was mustered, and the wrath of the Valar was kindled as it had not been since the fall of Autumno. The War of Wrath began, and the fate of Morgoth was sealed. Across the ruined lands of Beleriand, the final battle raged. The Valar, the Maiar, and the host of the Vanyar descended upon Morgoth's legions with a fury beyond mortal reckoning. Dragons blackened the skies. Balrogs met their end beneath the blades of the powers, and the earth itself was sundered by the clash of titanic forces. And in the end, Morgoth was cast down, bound in the chains of Anginor, and thrust beyond the circles of the world. His reign was broken, his dominion shattered. The curse that had begun with the rebellion of the Noldor, that had shaped the fate of Gondolin, Doriath, and all the realms of Beleriand, had at last come to an end. Yet victory was not without cost. Beleriand was lost beneath the waves, its beauty drowned by the tumult of war. The lands where once great cities had stood, where songs of old had been sung, where elves and men had fought and bled, were no more. Gondolin, though long fallen, was now but a whisper beneath the sea. Only in memory did its towers stand. Only in song did its fountains still flow. But its legacy endured. In the fate of Eärendil, in the redemption of the Eldar, in the final defeat of Morgoth, the sorrow of Gondolin had found its purpose. And so, the age of the Eldar in Middle-earth waned, and the world was forever changed. The victory over Morgoth did not restore what was lost, nor did it heal the wounds of the past. The lands of Beleriand were no more, swallowed by the sea, and the exiles who had once walked beneath the towers of Gondolin found themselves without a home. Many of the Noldor, weary of war and sorrow, heeded the call of the Valar and sailed west, departing Middle-earth forever. But some remained. bound by love, by duty, or by the lingering echoes of an age that had passed into legend. Eärendil, whose plea had turned the tide of fate, was granted a destiny unlike any before him. No longer could he walk the lands of elves or men, for he had become something beyond both. As a gift and a burden, the Valar set him to sail the heavens, guiding Vingalot across the sky, bearing the Silmarill's light as a star of hope for all who dwelt below. And so, the last son of Gondolin became the morning star, a beacon that would shine even in the darkest of nights, a reminder that though kingdoms may fall and beauty may fade, light is never wholly extinguished. Yet the sorrow of Gondolin lingered in the hearts of those who had once called it home. Tuor, the man who had walked the secret paths of the hidden city, was granted a fate unlike any other among his kind. Whether by the will of Ulmo or by some grace beyond the knowledge of even the wise, he was said to have passed into the west with Idril, counted among the firstborn. Thus, in the songs of the Eldar, Tuor was no longer counted among men, but was given an immortal place among the kindred of his beloved. But the tale of Gondolin did not end with those who departed. In Middle-earth, its memory lived on, carried by those who had escaped its ruin. The last echoes of its bloodline flowed in Elros and Elrond, the twin sons of Eärendil and Elwing, who bore the legacies of both elves and men. In them, the choice of kindred was given. Elros chose the fate of men, becoming the first king of Númenor, while Elrond chose the path of the Eldar, remaining in Middle-earth to guide its people in the ages to come. Through them, the fate of Arda itself was shaped, and in time, through many generations, that same blood would run in the veins of Aragorn, the heir of Isildur, who would rise to reunite the kingdoms of men in an age yet far away. Thus, the Fall of Gondolin was not merely a tragedy, but a turning point in the great tale of Middle-earth. It was the doom that led to salvation, the sorrow that bore the seed of hope. Though its walls no longer stood and its people were scattered, its light endured in the hearts of those who remembered. And when the star of Eärendil rose in the evening sky, shining high above the world, it was a sign that the struggles of the past were not in vain, that even in ruin there was a path forward, and that the song of Gondolin, though mournful, would never be forgotten.